Hi there. Thank you so much for coming. So, uh, this is the opening of the solo show by Robbie Williams, who unfortunately was not able to be with us tonight. He has, I guess, problems with his girlfriend or something like that. The solo show is also a research-based project on art production initiated by Natascha Sadr Haghighian, together with Uwe Schwarzer. Tonight at the opening, like a couple of things already happened. First of all, there was an unpacking and installing of the work with the registrar Zach Bruder. And now we will have a conversation with Chus Martinez and Brian Kuan, and of course Natascha Sadr Haghighian. Then on Tuesday, November 19th at 7:30, Steven Squibb will speak on Duchamp's strategy of refusal. Norman Chernik-Zeitlin will speak on sour labor and union politics at Southbiz. There will be a statement by Free Cooper Union. Lindsay Kaplan will speak on networking value and desire. And there will be a statement from Marian Ghani of Gulf Labor. Then on Sunday, November 24th at 6 p.m., Free Cooper Union presents The Politics of Destruction, a performative reading of the 41-page transcript of a Cooper Union Board of Trustees meeting in September of 2012, when the board discussed closing the school. What you have here in front of us is a two-part newspaper entitled In Perpetual Production that accompanies the exhibition solo show, with one part distributed now at the opening, and part two will be available in the exhibition during December. So, yes, I think now I'll just hand it over to Brian, who will start the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I think to begin, it might make sense to really try to understand what happened to the body of Robbie Williams, and I think Natascha can maybe shed a bit of light on this. He made a recent another recent disappearance.
Well, actually, I wanted to start with something else altogether, which is this. I don't know if you can see it.
Sound is not very good, no?
Huh?
The sound is coming.
Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me? I guess it's fine, no? No, I decided that I wanted to first actually share this with you because I received this yesterday, and it's a press announcement by the gallery that I'm working with in Berlin, Johann König, and obviously, maybe it's hard to read because I did a screenshot, but it says Natascha Sadr Haghighian solo show. And I was kind of speechless when I saw it because it completely ignored or seemed to undermine or even sabotage this project, which is weird when it comes from the gallery that is supposed to represent you, right? I doubt that it's an attempt to sabotage or co-opt, in this very obvious way. It's probably somebody who had just started at the gallery, maybe an intern who thought to make it right, something that they found in the e-flux press release, that something was missing there, namely the name of the artist. And they thought, oh, maybe I should better put it in before we send out this press release. So accidentally, something became obvious here that I'm actually quite grateful for after I stopped screaming yesterday. I didn't send out too furious emails to the gallery, but I tried to make them send out a correction, which they didn't so far. But actually, I think it's helpful because it shows a lot of the reasons why this project is here, solo show, and how difficult it is to claim that empty space of the author. So maybe, because by now a lot of you are probably really confused about what's Robbie or who Robbie actually is. I want to just say a few things about that. The screen seems very small. I'm a bit worried whether this can turn into a slideshow. It does. Okay. So solo show, as we announced it, was just solo show with this star, right? And the star, on the one hand, stands for this only person who claims authorship, the single authorship in this whole thing, which is Robbie Williams. And outside of that, it's basically a mess because I cannot come to terms with, the different stakes that so many people have in a project that is then afterwards called solo show. That for this project, I decided to just start naming everyone who was involved, which of course is also just one, other helpless form of representing the multiplicity. But actually, I think it's much more complex than that. And I think I would prefer to just not create this dualism or not see it as a dualism of, seeing the single author, which in our case, is Robbie, and then all the people who made this happen. But to see this maybe more as a kind of schizophrenic space, one that you cannot purify in the Latour sense of, putting things into their place. This is fiction, this is fact, this is the author, this is, made up, this is the artist, this is the curator. Like, let's just stop with all these dualisms and go right into this mess of the schizo thinking in this. So the star, even though my gallery tried to fill it with my name, I would rather go back to leaving it as a floating sign of what this could actually mean, this whole mess. So who is Robbie? If we take like an international art English version of what Robbie could be, this could be one answer. That, I mean, you know these kinds of texts, right? So this could be Robbie and what his work is about, right? He makes objects. The objects that we show here, as you could see in the press text, is an older work. It was done in 2008 as part of a project that I carried out together with a Berlin-based production company called Mixed Media. So who is Solo Show? Another international art language. Is it international? IAE?
English.
English, sorry. International Art English, yeah. A blurb for what is Solo Show?
Such a thing exists?
So, Mixed Media is a company that produces artworks for people, for artists who have a budget that, is big enough to hire a production company. So obviously they work with a lot of renowned artists. I met Uwe Schwarzer and I was really interested in what a production company for, producing artworks, what they actually do. So I asked him whether we could do a project where we actually show what they do. And that obviously was very complicated because it's very confidential. The relationship with their clients is confidential. So he was not able to talk in public about how these artworks are actually produced. So that is one of the reasons why Robbie is here, because we produced Robbie's first solo show in 2008 in order to be able to show and talk about Mixed Media's work. But as I already mentioned, I think it's more complicated than that, because Robbie, as much as he is fictional, he's also very real in the way that, you know, he's now here. You know, his work is here, and it's kind of not going away. I mean, we could throw it out, but then, you know, it still existed at some point in time. So he has a life on its own. And Brian and I, we were thinking, you know, as this project with mixed media happened in 2008, right before the so-called financial crisis, where's Robbie now? You know, 5 years into his career, 5 years into the so-called financial crisis. Where is the artistic modes of production? Where are they now? And Stephen Squibb is going to talk about artistic modes of production in relation to capitalist modes of production on his Tuesday's presentation, and I'm very much looking forward to that. But I think the various ways in which the capitalist modes of production are trying to co-opt the artistic modes of production are never complete. You know, they don't embrace all of what we do. That's what I really strongly believe in, or what I have to believe in order to carry on. So I think that Robbie has actually a life on his own, and he goes through a lot of stuff at the moment. Because, you know, one big reason is because he is solo, you know. And being solo, being a solo artist, and what that implies, you know, it creates a lot of stuff. So Robbie is solo, but he's also tired, or he's an author. He could be seen as a bubble. Oops. I went too far. Or, according to Reza Negarestani, he could be also part of an operative fog, where I would say, you know, Reza suggested that we should break this operative fog. I would say it's actually great to produce even more of this fog, and that it's a really excellent place to do things. It has a lot of potential. So yeah, I mean, he is definitely also afraid, and he is in perpetual production and in a crisis. I've said that before. He could also be seen as a crisis, and still he's taking pleasure out of what he does, which I think is also one big key to to the driving forces in what I was trying to address here in this, you know, because again, not to see this in terms of dualisms, it's also not about, you know, a good way to produce and an evil way or a bad way, you know. If you would create these dualisms of, so what does it mean to work with a production company in terms of authorship, in terms of division of labor and alienated labor in, you know, in relation to something that is fulfilling, all these ideas that you might have when you think about outsourcing work to a production company. And then you might want to have, you know, as the opposed practice, the work of an artist who still does everything with their hands and who has this very personal gesture and who would not kind of do things that are more complex than what he can achieve. So I really think that that these are not the interesting dualisms, but that it is extremely vital that we think about what artistic modes of production could actually mean inside and outside of the logic of capitalism. And I'm not talking about alternatives here, because I think, you know, we should stop producing alternatives. I think it's all there. It's just about how you use it and how you operate in it and how you also claim pleasure within these modes of production. So I would leave the introduction here, and we can
Enter the fog.
enter the fog. Exactly.
I have a question. Could you explain a little bit your relationship with Robbie? Meaning, I don't know if this is this microphone. Yeah. Could you explain like how you came to the idea of him, or who is he in relationship with you? Meaning, I'm thinking about, for example, there is a fantastic book by Borges that he traces the history of impostors. And then he's saying that the history of impostors, on the one hand, it's a moral history because you can claim, don't do that. I think it's better to go into the standard channels and so on. But then at the end of the book, he has this excurso where he says that the impostors offer us the best possibility of understanding our relationship with the standard modus of production. Only those that are actually trying to break it in a really stupid way sometimes, like trying to just get, pickpocketing in Buenos Aires in the late 50s or 60s, or try to take the identity of somebody else, which is what fascinated Borges the most. It's just great to delegate so much that somebody takes your own identity instead of being something negative. Is the most positive way of living. So in how far is Robbie the best way of living in the art world for you, and what is your personal relationship with him? Could you define it? I think it's an invention, or is an imposter, or is a doppelganger?
Definitely not a doppelganger. I think he has a life on his own, and he also he does things that I would not be interested in doing. I've never had any interest in working with a production company, or it definitely allows me to get an insight or to understand about
But it was through talking to the production company that you got to know him. I think I'm working now in a Caribbean museum, so all this kind of, through whom did you communicate? Was the production company and the conversations about different ways of being able to produce work that then gave you an idea of who could be the artist actually in you, quote unquote, that could just release this, could fulfill that desire of working with such a company? I think is the conversation that made him alive.
Well, I would completely, if I don't know if I'm illusionist here, but I would completely not claim any responsibility in that sense for, he's not, I didn't conceive Robbie Williams. He came out of a 2-year discussion where I went to mixed media workshops and sat with Uwe, and we had coffee. Like every week I would go there for an hour or two, and we would just talk, and then at some point we were trying to find a solution for how can we actually talk about this? How can we, having all the concerns that Uwe had about this project, and basically balancing all the different concerns and interests, and then Robbie just appeared.
Mm-hmm.
He appeared, and as soon as he appeared, he started to have his own demands, his own agenda, his own logic, and I also, at some points, he scared me, and I thought that I should take control over what was happening, because also these big objects that he started producing really scared me. But then I thought, no, actually, that's what needs to happen. This and that's what they need to do. So I would not identify with him, but he allows me to have a discussion that I would otherwise not have, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what he thinks now that Johann Koenig has killed him or put him out of the equation.
I don't think that that the gallery did that. What I think what they did was to put him back into the containments of the artwork. The claim was too bold. It was outside of the artwork. It was claiming authorship in this way that just doesn't fit with the art market. And so what they did was, no, this has to go back into the artwork. So he can be totally, he's totally fine with being inside, but not outside.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, what they did. They put him back into the containment of the work.
Mm-hmm. This was one thing that we were talking about a lot when we were thinking about this project as something that came together in 2008. And we were looking at the interviews with Robbie, and it seems, and Robbie is actually he's an almost arrogant kind of gallery artist who really is kind of excited about his career, and he's overworked and he feels really great. Everything is ahead of him, and it seemed like actually this kind of voice is not so operative now.
Oh. What do you think? Why is that?
Well, so this is one thing that I always think of with this was something that it was the painter Kevin Jensen in Los Angeles who was saying, as a kind of a provocation. I mean, it's an interesting provocation. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about it, but he said that maybe actually one of the reasons why the art market is doing so well after the financial crash is because actually it seems that artworks, which is of course authorship, which is of course artists, who are of course people, have become more stable as investments than property itself. So if it actually makes more sense to invest in artworks than in property, then it's also an investment in a career, in a trajectory, and in a person. So the futures that used to be in real estate, for example, are now the futures of actual people. This explains. This was a really interesting kind of figure to explain how the pressures to produce can set in on a person and can actually alter psychology.
Mm-hmm.
A kind of real schizophrenia.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe one thing that that happens for me, just like an observation when working on this project, was this on the one hand, this discovery how there's this mix-up of of course, yeah, the art market invests in a name, right? So they want to have that name go up and expand, but it's always a decision how much you identify with that name and how much you melt with as a living body, as a person, with that claim of I don't know. I mean, I'm a bit weird. Anyways, I even hesitate calling myself an artist because I feel that's already scary. Because that's already where it gets you. So if you just claim to be a person instead, and then whatever they do with the name, that's not necessarily you, all of you, right? But if you do, then you might be in real trouble. I mean, you might also have a really great success story, but I'm not so sure how much you can stay a person.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I feel that the negotiation with Robbie is really also about how can we stay persons with actual claims and with a political demands that are outside of an artwork, because that's also one thing that drives me crazy, that that everything is supposed to be contained in this. You can it's the extension of the white cube that everybody thinks is gone, but actually it still exists in the name, and so you're supposed to put everything back into that container, right? So that it doesn't harm anybody. But to have an actual claim can only happen outside of that, I guess.
Yeah, but I would also try to, on the one hand, it's true what you are saying. On the other, this work is also needs to be seen in the conjunction of the rest of the works. And there is an interest in, it's very difficult to portray economy and to portray exchanges into economy. And actually, the life of economy is something that, on the one hand, interests us, and on the other, it has almost very few means of being represented as an event. So you have been always looking in your work for excuses or, let's say, potential places where this can be represented, and this is one of them. But I would like to, because I'm always a little bit uneasy when we stay by this kind of character that appear into your work that is showing us that you can delegate your work and somebody can produce it, and this could be read or misread as a critique, because I don't think that you are criticizing modus of production, but you are actually emphasizing the different processes of delegation, not only in the work, but also in the identity, in the economy, in the gallery, in the system, in the white cube, even in your name. I think you delegate in your own name when you appear or when you show your passport when you are crossing the border of a country, for example. So how does relate with other works that you have done, and what is this work in relationship with others?
I mean, I would reject the idea to contain it as my work. I really don't see it as that. My work in this was to initiate the project because I wanted to learn about a way of production that was new to me, because I had never worked with a production company, and I also had no idea that people work this way. I mean, a lot of things then suddenly became clear to me that, I'm already overwhelmed with doing like 3 shows a year, and there's some of my colleagues would do like many more shows a year, and they would still be able to handle it. And I was always wondering, how do they do it? Of course, I knew that they had assistants and stuff, but there's this dimension to it was kind of new to me, and I felt almost naive that I didn't know. It was like, this is how it works.
But you also discovered that in the States as such, they don't exist in the same extent that they exist in Europe, which is an interesting, perhaps you can talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I think that's some kind of interesting cultural misunderstanding. That's how Europe understands that production happens in America. In America, it does not happen like that, but it does happen in Europe like that.
Yeah.
So there is some kind of a strange transfer.
Yeah. I mean, this is maybe also something that whoever has experience with their practice here in New York can add something to this, because I just had some observation with the discussions I had so far in New York with people who are who have their practice based in New York, that there is apparently a difference to let's say Berlin, where in New York apparently there is no such thing as production companies. There's a lot of people who work as fabricators, and a lot of them are also artists at the same time, so they would finance their own artistic work with producing the works for other artists. But
maybe it's good to talk a bit about mixed media also, because this is
it's good
almost
to clarify
like,
who
it's
they
almost
are.
like something that exists in Hollywood, where you go from, you can really ask for a planet or something.
Yeah, well, probably because it exists in Hollywood, it does not exist in the American art world.
yeah.
And
Yeah, sure.
And because it does not exist in the American art world, the European art world took it as the way Americans understand. Because it's not only about producing or delegation or somebody else doing it, or even translating your will, but it's also about what do you understand under production?
Yeah.
By pieces, by chunks, totalities, the totality of a translation of a wish, one element, because ateliers is the way that painting has been produced historically, and many other things. So there is nothing good or bad about it. The question is I think that the project is about discussion that production is not one thing, is that not all understand the same under production.
But do you want to know some more in detail what mixed
Yes, we
media
want to
does?
know the gossip about mixed media, all of it. Now.
Well, I can refer to to the conversation that is in the newspaper. That is, of course, from 5 years ago with Uwe Schwarzer, who is one of the initiators and founders of mixed media. And he talks a lot about how mixed media came into being. But maybe I can say so much that he himself also started as an artist. He went to art school, and during art school he already started helping colleagues to produce their work, to build their work, because he had some skills that his friends didn't have. So they asked him to, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And apparently, not only did he do a very good job, but he also enjoyed it a lot. And after some time, he found that he actually enjoys it more than making his own artworks. Additionally, he also found that it was much more pleasurable to get paid for what he's doing, and not to get paid with this promise of having a career later on, or maybe selling at some point, or this kind of abstract promise of payment. He didn't find so convincing, and he found that it was much more convincing for him to get paid for what he does. So he stopped doing his own work at some point, and did more and more, got more and more assignments for producing bigger and bigger work. So he just grew very fast. Like, he started to hire people, then he expanded the workshop. So now it's like a whole building with several stories, and whatever they can't do in their own facilities, they outsource. So they have a lot of like smaller companies that they work with. And so there's, from what I understand, there is basically no limit to what you can, what you can hire them to do for you. You can basically come with any type of project in any sort of media and ask them to produce it. And they will find a way. And if they can't do it in-house, they will, ask somebody or find somebody who can do that. And you will be guaranteed a packaged product that will be sent off to wherever the show is in a crate. And, and there's also a guarantee that if this work should ever fall apart, that they would come in and repair it. But normally that should not be the case. So it should also work. So it takes a lot of pressure from, in terms of deadlines, but also in terms of, everyone who makes stuff or who comes up with stuff, they know that there's a lot of points where you have thought, you have had an idea, but then when you try to build it, you notice that, it's actually not, it's not working. And you have to start to be creative and find solutions for it. So that's also what they do, right? They find solutions for your problem. And
name some of the artists who use this one.
you can go to their website, and there's a long list of names. So I'm very bad with names, I have to admit. So
That's why you don't use your own.
I keep forgetting them, but a lot of established artists work with them, and not only based in Berlin, but also based in New York or based elsewhere. They keep working with this company, and it's also not the only company in Berlin. There's also other companies that work in a very similar manner. They might have started later, or in a different way, but basically that's what these production companies do.
But they normally don't work the way you work with them, meaning they work with the real
No.
artists, that they propose an idea and then they just, in a workshop situation, try to realize it. So for them it was an uncommon situation when you
Yes.
came with two propositions. One, produce the work, then produce the work of an artist that I don't know yet.
It was a very, normally they stay in the shadows, they're not mentioned. Everyone, insiders, they know that they exist, and a lot of works are produced by them, and sometimes it's even to the scale of if there is a group show, that they would have produced most of the works in the show. So it really it happens sometimes, but they're normally not mentioned, and they also enjoy that. They like to be in the shadows. They don't even have a sign on their building that says this is, you know, mixed media. You just have to know, and they like that kind of informal, this informal atmosphere. And when you go to the studio, it's also, you sit in a corner where there's like old, like furniture, and there's an old coffee machine, and Uwe makes the coffee, and it's a situation where you can sit together and think and talk, and you know, so it's a very nice atmosphere there.
Yeah, but I think, no, I'm sure. But judging, I'm convinced. But judging by reading the newspaper and the interview with the artists that appear after the conversation, is also some kind of Aladdin wish for meeting one of these guys, which are not, you know, they're not very old, not very young. They are promising, they are male, they are, I think, heterosexual, but it's not clear. You know, it's like this kind of climber of the art world that you wanted to meet. So it's also all about your desire, because they could have produced also a female artist, unsuccessful, but trying to go there, you know, but old, like almost at the end of the career, never having exposure, going to mixed media to see if all the unsuccess was lying in the production, and actually if they could just do it better, so before she dies, she can see a retrospective in a big museum, if possible, in America. And you know, I think why not? But you did not. I think you were invocating somebody, and you just came with that, I must say, a little bit pure figure, like you know, he's not exactly the most fascinating man in the world, but you wanted it.
I don't know it. You know, to be honest, in the beginning, I just thought that it would be nice to have somebody who just exists, and you don't ask many questions. So it's more like the, you know, the good reason rather than the real reason. So you know, you have someone with a name that sounds familiar, but then people would ask, oh, the singer, and then you would say, no, the artist, and then people would not ask any more questions because okay, you know, that's what I imagined. Why I thought, you know, he should be Robbie Williams, but of course.
And how do you convey to them? Because in the conversation you wanted that him. He could be also like, you know, he could be Spanish, gay, being repressed under the Franco regime, longing for stop being a painter, become more conceptual, being accepted in England. So
I feel that he can still become that, you know. He's
You
not
didn't hear?
So are you going to ask mixed media for Franco? Like, you need one piece of the picture coming back.
I would be reluctant to do that, but I would be very happy if anybody else would do it. You know, like I feel I'm through with, you know, engaging with him on that level. This very banal reason that I mentioned was why he came into existence, but then of course he just went out of control. He just did exactly what you said. He just claimed all this, you know, like, I'm a man, I'm heterosexual, I'm, you know, he just fell into place basically.
It seemed like with Uwe that you also stumbled into some kind of like a black market of authorship where he would also collaborate with the artist and even sort of cover for the artist when the artist maybe ran out of ideas or wasn't quite sure what they were doing.
Uwe activating him at night or something like that?
Yeah, works the night shift.
Well, with the works, I mean, we could only show one of his pieces, where this work actually has 5 pieces, and in the newspaper you see parts of all the 5 fences that they made. But I was not involved in the process of making these, so that's where also Uwe and Robbie did their own thing, or not only Uwe, but everyone at Mixed Media who was involved in making these objects.
Mm-hmm. I remember seeing, it was very funny because it was a moment in the art, and it has lots to do with Berlin, and I don't know even how to translate it into English, where you were going from show to show, and then you came to the idea that everything was kind of related in this new family of post-conceptualism that I used to call Stangeplatte-Kunst. So there was always some kind of pole and some kind of surface, like a plate. So like this kind of cadere and a piece of something flat that kind of refers to painting, but it's not painting. And it was always there, and it was in pieces, and sometimes it was modular, but very few and very minimal. So when I went to Bologna, where you were showing that exhibition, I thought also that was one of the most interesting reflections on a language that we lost, which is talking about style. So if everything that happens in a work happens differently, and everything in a work is more similar to an event than to production, then it's the question of style is an interesting question, versus judgment, versus stability and economy on the one hand. And the other thing was like humor, like a real sense of humor about this relationship with materials and forms that we gained but also lost in the last, let's say, 30 decades of talking about conceptualism, nobody really knowing what it was, and all the Italian curators and young people being in the opening being completely happy by the result, because the result made them have this, it resembles the atmosphere that you would get in the north of Europe, mid of Europe, and not in Italy, so it was good. So, it was a relief. So, stylistically speaking.
Yeah, style, but also form. How things take shape, and it's really amazing to see. I mean, in the case of what mixed media did for Robbie, it's almost like an encyclopedia of styles, right? Or of forms, where they just had a lot of fun coming up with or citing all these different.
But it looks very dated. It really looks like a final show, post 2 years after the final show, a little bit better. So it has this character of a certain school. So there is lots of interpretation into the work. So the time is really embedded into it.
Yeah.
Like you look at it now, and it looks dated in a good way. Meaning, why not?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely from that time, and I think that's also, maybe that also tells something about where production might be now. I mean, you were mentioning this shift towards, I don't know, pottery, and that there's a lot of desire to do things with your hands again, and to also reclaim skills in a very like artistic way. And I'm not really sure about what that actually means or what it produces, but I guess it's maybe a response to these types of surface and what did you say, like plain and
Yeah, but it also has to do
Support.
with
Yeah.
presence, meaning, or well, what it came in the process of doing Documenta is not only about reclaiming skills as in opposition with those that have lots of skills and do it technically, but also the question of a presence. I don't know how exactly frame it, but it has to do with the material, the presence not of the individual, but a presence and a relationship with materials versus post-information kind of technology that is not even, I think, even like information technology would look like pottery now.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
it's like when we are beyond that moment, so people is coming back to a certain new understanding of matter,
Yeah.
which
yeah.
still in the making, I think. I cannot even
Yeah, I think this is also something
articulate
that
it.
happened to Robbie in the past few years, where now it becomes very hard to actually locate where the actual material is. An actual artisanal work is pointed towards spectacle. It always has to have a sign on it saying that this is made by hand. It's almost, the point is to produce the sign.
Yeah, but it's also interesting. When I went for the first time to visit one of these companies because of something else with Ferran Adrià, which is a chef, and then it was some people, it was a Spanish journalist visiting it with us, and then he was criticizing the way that Olafur Eliasson was producing the work. And then he knows nothing about contemporary art, but he was invited to Documenta 12, so he gained an immense interest in knowing how actually art is produced at that time. And since I speak perfect Spanish, I must say, I accompanied him into that visit. And then he turned to us and said, but why are you all talking about it? I think while I don't know, transforming an anchovy into foam, and somebody else is just blowing up a tomato and making it into a café con leche, and then everyone else is doing some kind of essence of, I don't know, tortilla de patata in small pieces. All of them are chefs. I am chef, and they are, and we are.
Everyone is a chef.
Everyone's a chef. There are 17 of them. We put the plate together, and nobody exactly. There is a very basic set of instructions. The plate comes into the table, and they pay because I cook it. But it's clear that the modus of production in this kind of molecular cuisine can only resemble this or that. And then when he closed the door of the studio, said, "I'm very happy to know that the chefs and cuisine influence so much contemporary art." And I agreed. So it was not the other way around. I think that there is something coming from the kitchen going into the studio, and now going back into the kitchen in an interesting way happening there.
Mm. But also in terms of the pleasure of that you take into having skills, or doing like a very skilled.
No, the fact that everyone in the workshop is a cooker or is a chef, as he is, and they are kind of producing something together that only one is going to claim as his own.
Mm.
But there is absolutely no friction in understanding the roles or understanding the function, or also knowing about the immense gaps that exist in between a plate conceived by the cooker or a plate in this kind of collective. They don't talk, but of course everyone is interpreting it as they want.
Mm.
So it's very similar of this mixed media, what you are describing.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I experienced. How they work and how they also, that sounds like happy family, but it's actually, even though they work under a lot of pressure, they always work in these teams where everyone has an assignment in this, and they produce something together, but and everyone can do something very well. And so they would also not have this conflict of like, oh, let's do this together, like because we're a big family, but you do this, you do that, and then in the end something comes together as a big dish, or as a meal. What I found maybe fascinating but also confusing is so what does this skill actually mean in this process? Because at least I don't know, a lot of people that I meet, and maybe also including me, there was also this fantasy about being an amateur and claiming this situationist space of always staying an amateur and trying to never do something that well that you would become a professional, or this whole discussion about professionalization. It's something that was rejected in so many different ways throughout the history of artistic practices, I would say. And then it comes back through a very funny back door in this way of like, oh, we can still do that, but we can also hire people who actually have these skills and who can do things in this very awesome way.
But the whole world of literature work like that. It's still working like that, meaning you can hire writers, and there is like the black writer is not a myth, it's a reality. And they do novels, like
Ghost
us
writing,
in novels,
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Ghost. Yes, in your book on black writers.
I mean, it's a funny. It's almost like an inversion of what happened, of what Duchamp did. No, I mean, what did Duchamp do? He most of all he freed the artist's hand from having to be directly involved in the production of work. But then, what's so funny about the way that Robbie works now, or the way that things work now, is that this has become totally hysterical. It actually reverses all of the time.
Mm. Yeah, it becomes hysterical, I think, in this very moment when you are an artist and a fabricator, and maybe even there's some debt involved because you graduated from art school and you have to pay back your debt. So you are working as a fabricator and also producing your own artwork, and hysterically trying to make this division between what you do and what you really do, or between how you invest your skills in the one thing or your mental desires in the other one, or how these things get constantly mixed up within your own. I mean, this is all happening in one body. In a very crazy way, maybe an internalized austerity measure, but also kind of almost like embracing several parts of the history of artistic production within your own.
Yeah. But the last thing you want
existence.
is also to claim that there is some sort of authenticity or things like that. So
No, but you know.
I just want to clarify.
I mean, if it would be about authenticity, then why would Robbie be there?
Because
I
it's
mean-
unauthentic. And then it can get revealed as unauthentic, and then people can say, well, you know, there is all these companies doing that, but this is not art. You know, this kind of a moral judgment that can be, which I don't think it's the most that has any interest, any interest at all. Meaning, for me, they can do whatever they want, and if it, so it's much more complex than that. So the relationship is, what I like is that it becomes really complex, and you understand the complexity. But if you are a fabricator during the day and an artist doing your own practice during the night, it's life. I think there's nothing about, there's nothing bad about one thing that is bad about the other, I think.
Oh, I would wish to think through this without any kind of moral stakes, but just like to really think it through and just go, wow. Not in in a sense of like, as I tried to say in the beginning, not to create dualisms, but to really think this in a schizo way and I find it profoundly confusing. I'm not saying that one is good and the other is bad, or in general it's bad or good or anything.
But maybe even the schizo position isn't enough, because if you turn this paradox of the artist who has to produce works for other people by day and then work on their own works at night, if you turn this on the side, you can imagine a kind of almost like a perfect circle where the artist is producing works for other artists who are how would it work? Whether you're producing works for other artists who are producing your works that you
would be so
produce at
amazing.
night.
If we would
It would be very
start
nice to have
this,
this kind of
If everybody just
Yeah.
produced the other, like someone else's work, and not like create this crazy idea of like I have to do my own thing also. That would be amazing.
But it has been done. I think when you attend college, you normally don't write your papers, no?
Maybe you-
cheating is part of a system of understanding, exchange, production, gender, because there's a big thing. I think you did not choose another woman, it's a man, and so on and so forth. So we could talk hours for that. But in cheating, there is so much information about systems. So it's a basic tool for learning and for understanding knowledge. So yes, let's embrace it.
Yeah, we can embrace it, but then at the same time, it seems important to recognize that it does not resolve. That this
It has
percent-
exactly the same problems as non-cheating.
Yeah, exactly. Either way, you're fucked.
No, it's symmetrical, as Claude Lévi-Strauss would say. You are producing a system of symmetries, but you are not resolving any problem, which is good, I think. That's why, you did not create another artist, you create a symmetry with an artist already existing. So it's some kind of a ritual, it's not a game. So in that sense, you are not playing with the viewer, you are more ritualizing the relationship that we have with certain types of art. They are a little bit like more institutional or more into the side of this marketplace versus something that goes beyond or is outside the marketplace. And that's why it's interesting, because it shows a side which is almost perfect in representing this set of relations. You being outside this set of relations, then it really, makes it more complex, makes two systems visible at once, so to say.
So you're still saying it's all...
No,
Like-
I'm saying that you created a company which is symmetrical to you.
It's interesting that if you go, I don't know if this is still the case, but if you go to the Mixed Media website, they actually categorize the project as Natascha, Sadr, Haghighian projects.
So you are in the web.
Yeah, which, is funny when you think about how those sets of relations work, that you're, again, the gallery and the very company with which you collaborate, we're sort of putting you back within that mold in a sense. So.
Yeah.
So it's totally transparent what they do for the artist, and then they put it in the web.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They actually changed it.
Okay.
I saw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To Robbie?
Yeah.
Great.
Probably feedback from the gallery or the other way around. The gallery saw it in mixed media, put it wrong. Then mixed media put it right, then the gallery puts it right.
But do they openly acknowledge what they produce? Like, do they say,
Yeah.
like, our products?
On their website, yes,
Yeah.
they do. I mean, that's why I said, go to their website and you will see.
It's good. It's like a documentary work of it's really,
No, but it's not, the revolution exactly to do that. It's not the revolution to do that, really. I mean, if you think about it, sculptors have used foundries in very similar ways, and people make pulling editions of prints, also do workshop production. But I'm really interested by the fact that you said that Robbie, and I don't think I'm the only person in the room who heard Robin Williams initially, right? It's
His
kind
brother.
of a standing joke. But, and wouldn't it be great if he walked in the door? But or maybe not, but the way that you describe him coming to you is super interesting, because you don't choose him. He comes, and that's the way Nietzsche talks about Zarathustra. So now we're into the big schizo, right? But J.K. Rowling also talks about Harry Potter that way. Didn't he walk down the train? So in a way, this character comes to you, and you then coexist and do things, but there's a story that unfolds that you're not entirely in control of. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it scared the shit out of me. I mean, at some points I really wanted to drop this project because I felt that it's doing things that I cannot relate to.
Uh-huh.
But I had to let it do that. And that's exactly because, it's not about controlling it, but it's about letting it do what it does and to learn something from that, and letting it coexist and taking shape in the way that it wants to take shape.
Now, is Robbie going to grow old?
Well,
Bearded?
if
you
he
know?
can get through the crisis that he's in at the moment, I hope. I don't. Maybe I don't. To be honest, I would like to get rid of him, but
It's too late, Natascha.
I've never been friends with him.
Does he sell better than you?
Huh?
Does he sell better than you?
I guess he does because I don't sell.
Well, maybe not, because the gallery, doesn't want him around, right? Interfering.
I'm just curious.
No, but it's very true what you say.
The gallery will realize that checks to Robbie Williams don't clear and start to endorse the name.
Is a question
Yeah.
Yeah. So a really interesting point you made. It was really interesting to learn that mixed media, one, likes not being acknowledged, and 2, doesn't even have a sign outside its own building, because that's precisely the same set of practices of McKinsey, the very famous management consulting firm in the US. Very infamously, one doesn't like being acknowledged ever, so no one knows actually who their clients are. In part because they like doing that because oftentimes their clients are competitors, so they have insider knowledge of both sides of a kind of competition. And then also infamously, they don't even want people to know which building they work in, so there's no sign for McKinsey, even though it's the main tenant in a building on 53rd Street. So my question from that, which I'm going to phrase in 2 ways, is one, why would there be an analogous relationship between US management consulting companies and European art production companies? And then to phrase that in a slightly different way, it's never been clear to me why the art world remains loyal to this convention of the singular author name when, of course, there are all these people in so many works that are involved in that production. You know, why haven't we ever been more like, say, the film production company where we credit everyone else, right? And it's always been clear to me why the singular author would desire to uphold that convention. But what I'm hearing from you is that there are actually desires from the sort of the production fabricator artist class that also want to maintain that system. And I'd be curious if you could say a little bit more about what those desires are.
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe it relates back to this operative fog that Reza Negarestani brought up in the accelerationist symposium the other day. I think that this fog is a place where a lot of things can be done in an informal way, and I think that we probably all know that that there's something very powerful in doing things informally, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons, and I'm not sure, but this is just a guess. This is maybe one of the reasons why the art system, and by that I mean also as well the market, but also really like artistic modes of production that I see outside of the market, just to simplify for a moment, that they both insist on this fog of staying informal, of not writing down the rules of this game, which you would need to do. You know, if you see like why is everyone mentioned in film? As far as I know, it's for the simple reason because there's unions, very powerful unions in film, and they made sure that this would happen. And I think every attempt to unionize in the arts has failed on so many levels. Even the very notion of solidarity, whenever it's kind of introduced into the arts, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentation about Gulf labor on Tuesday, where it is actually an initiative that tries to create, a discussion around solidarity and how that could look like. But I think that the art system, as much as the practices that evolve and develop within art, kind of stay within that fog because a lot of things are possible in there. And again, without moralizing, it's, a lot of things, I mean, messed up things, bad things, good things, whatever, like opportunities, potentials, possibilities, vague things. And I think that, anyone who is interested in power would be interested in claiming that space. But that's just what I think.
Natascha, you mentioned that Robbie sells more than you do. So now I was wondering two things: if he's represented by a gallery, and when he sells his work, where the money goes to whom?
Mhm.
And the other thing is, when I see the list of participants and the solo show, then I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, like how different ways that the contributors, the participants, their role in the research project, in the show, and if there is this distinction between research project and show exhibition.
Mhm. So Robbie so far doesn't have a gallery that I know of, and with the way that that this was produced, the money came from a museum. You know, like the way that the first solo show was produced, it was financed through a museum, and there was a lot of discussion around, you know, how mixed media should get paid and so on and so forth. And in the end, they insisted that they want to be paid in the way that they would normally get paid, because for them it was too challenging or too complicated to think this in a different way. And then to your second question, the list is, we started when the project, you know, started, and we didn't, we decided that we don't edit it to take out people who were involved in the first version of this, because I think they still helped to make this happen. I'm not sure whether the word participant is right, but I also haven't come up with a different word. I think for now it's just the list of people who made this solo show happen on so many different levels, and it's really oversimplifying to put this into a list, because of course people who are in this list have very, very different stakes, and some got paid, some didn't get paid, or got paid in very, very different ways. And you know, there's all these different complications of the different types of labor in this, that are completely flattened in this list. So this is just an almost silly placeholder for a discussion that yet has to take place, of how this is actually because I don't have an answer to this. I don't know how this could be, how this could take shape. Because of course not everyone in this is has the same interests even.
Follow up. To follow-up question. So the participants, how they contribute to create Robbie or not? Yeah, maybe this first. The participants, the list.
Yeah.
So how they contribute to create the creation of Robbie?
Yeah, really in very different ways. So, you know, there would be people who worked at mixed media in the different workshops. So, you know, people who worked in the wood workshops or in the various other workshops. There would be the people who were involved in producing this newspaper, or also the first publication that unfortunately is out of print, but there was also a publication for the original version of this. The people who installed the show, the people who did the sound, the people who there's so many levels, like the administrators, the interns, the people who write press releases, even also the shippers, the people who built the crates, the people who also unpacked and installed the work. I think I mentioned that already. And the people also who participate in the events, which is also part of the project. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I was just remembering when you were speaking about this kind of consistent failure to form unions or strong solidarities within the field of art, that, like workers' unions, how so many of the interesting projects involving economics have actually come from complete slippages. Like we were talking a lot about this problem with Andy Warhol Foundation, when Andy Warhol Foundation is basically responsible for authenticating works of Andy Warhol. And they had a huge problem when they started. I think they had a lawsuit from a number of collectors, because it turns out that Andy Warhol, he had a number of factories around that were mass producing the works, and he would show up and he would sign the works. But then at one point he said, well, it's a lot of work to go and have to sign these things. So he would have people who would actually sign his works in his absence. And then, of course, these people realized if they can sign Andy Warhol works, they can basically just produce tons of Andy Warhol works and just sort of sell them, and they can do whatever they like with them. So the market was flooded with these rogue Warhols that were just floating around. But then Ahmed Ogut just walked in, and with him you think of something like his Silent University project, where with the Silent University, he basically discovered that you have, in so many cities, you have huge crowds of migrant workers and refugees with enormously advanced degrees, with PhDs in astrophysics and theoretical physics, who are driving taxis and doing work that has nothing to do with their education. And so in a way, this is a way of sort of collecting, feeding this kind of errant, displaced labor back into a place where it could actually become useful again. Somehow I see these as related, but.
Hi. You kind of hinted at it, that you're done with him, you're tired of him, you want to pass it on. How would you allow, or how would you make it possible for Robbie to be considered sort of a open source thing, or a bit of an avatar, kind of like Luther Blissett or Ann Lee? Would you allow for that, or that's not part of the logic for you?
It's not. I don't think it's from. I don't feel I even have the right to allow that, because I don't have any copyright claims on him. So I think that he is. Yeah, he's out there and for everyone to use. So he is already open source. I would claim, at least, or I used him this way. I didn't. That's how he came to me.
Well, he came to you, and therefore, you were the chosen one. So would you be okay with the rest of us being the chosen ones?
Well, yeah, of course.
Okay.
I mean,
that question. My other question is. There's a long history of fictional artists.
Yeah.
Where would you place Robbie in that sort of constellation?
Where would you place him? I don't know.
I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm curious where you see him. I mean, you kind of mentioned that you don't really see him as a nom de guerre or sort of a pseudonym of sorts, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's more, thinking him as a potential, someone who still can grow in multiple ways. So he could become something different that he is now, which I think is also true for all of us, as we're not necessarily bound to the essentialist kind of confinements of who we're acting out at this very moment. So we could also claim to become something different, right? So I would say Robbie is, in that sense, maybe not so different from me or from maybe someone else who would enjoy that kind of experiment or extension of their practice or of their personality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one more question.
Yeah. It's
Hi. So I was wondering whether you imagine that you ended up with this straight, apparently white male avatar, perhaps because it was the blankest slate that could be imagined in the art world and the most flexible identity with the most ease of travel to different levels and spaces.
Mm. Maybe that's very true. Yeah.
Adam, we all know it's you.
Yeah, I don't know how much of, maybe it was, to not resist the way that he was taking shape. Maybe that was kind of trying to understand the kind of main flows in that production space, and it seems like that's the way they're taking shape. Also in the sense of, the way that also our discussions, the more they got into being concretely about the work, became like, had this sportive aspect to it. Like, how about we do this? How about it would look like that? Wow, that would be cool. And it seemed like the voice that was talking through the works that were taking shape kind of didn't want to resist maybe that persona or that. But the way that I thought of him, and when I introduced this kind of what was in the museum originally a wall text, this kind of blurb about who he might be, I always thought that this is just one version, and there could be like tens and hundreds and thousands of other versions of what he could be. And then it would be interesting to see how that changed the perception of the work. But that then comes too close to a project that I actually do, which is Bioswap, where, every time someone introduces me and they use a bio from Bioswap, I can see in people's faces, like when I'm introduced as a painter or as a whatever, I'm a Cuban American artist, or I'm a Turkish Vietnamese artist, or I'm, there's all these, these films that start rolling in this very moment. And at the very moment when you say that this was actually borrowed from Bioswap, the film stops, and then it's like, oh, okay. And I think that I didn't want to put too much of that into.
It's interesting that you talk about it as coming possibly from the desires of the fabricators. It's interesting that you talk about it as possibly emerging from the desires of the fabricators. So maybe Robbie Williams is the ghost in the machine of every work that's produced by mixed media.
Well, there is actually 2 women that I know of that work in mixed media. And one actually works in a workshop, and the other one is administrator. And the rest are all white men, which I think might be a total accident. And I don't want to, or never wanted to judge that, but it's just an observation. So maybe that's also how, as you say, it's kind of an echo of that space. Mm-hmm.
She just left and opened her own production.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
All right. So thanks a lot, everyone. And stick around for a drink, yeah?